Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Today is the day. Today, we've got a good one, which I'm actually quite excited for. Today, we have something I've been looking forward to do for quite a while. This is our intro video for our next big project, employee management system. Now, I'm quite excited to do this one because it incorporates some of the things I absolutely love, banking, as well as like data, kind of the back end side and different services, all of that kind of coding stuff. I think it'll be a really good challenge and a really fun experience. So, how is today going to work? Well, I've got a PowerPoint presentation. Please don't worry, it's not as bad as it might look. But really, the first thing that I really want to cover, to be fair, is going to be the introduction. So, what is it? Now, I spoke briefly about this. I did mention it on my LinkedIn as well, but I was hesitant on how much I say. It's going to cover different things. So you can see that it's going to cover employee management. So that's managing employees, hiring and firing, um, kind of looking at employee data, that kind of stuff that you get at a normal work environment. Payroll and staff and performance. So the staff is related to that employee management stuff. So how many staff you have, I said hiring, firing, and looking at the details. Payroll, their pay, when they get paid, you could like, for example, send off their payroll on a certain day, and performance. So things like performance reviews, logs, all that kind of stuff. So this is going to incorporate more than just one service. And like the previous projects I've done, but all of them, to be fair, have pretty much been one service with maybe more than one feature. This is multiple services, each with their own multiple features. And this will be a really fun one to do. Now, this is built to simulate a real company system. It's not to be kind of a demo or anything like that. So I suspect this project in particular is going to take me quite a bit of time, which is good because it'll be a really good portfolio piece. With that being the case, what's the core architecture, and why this project? Well, I'm going to talk about why this project first because that's really the main thing that you want to know. So, projection style design. So, how I've tried to design it is like what you would in production with multiple services separated, following all the solid principles, more than just one user in the database, and also having it where they're all fully tested as much as possible. And there's also thoughts surrounding, in as it says on there, user security, exception handling, and testing, all key points that most real systems really have to adhere to make sure they're safe, they're functional, and they're quite easy to maintain and build forward going forward. It is more complex. I got more technologies I'm using this time than I have previously. We are dealing with multiple database users this time, multiple schemas, and multiple SQL joins, more advanced SQL. So left joins, right joins, inner joins, all that kind of stuff. It's going to be more advanced, and that's going to require a bit more effort and time to learn, and develop. Because I'll be honest, in terms of SQL, know a little bit. I'm not really a SQL expert. I'm definitely not as good at my SQL as I am at my Java. So this is going to be a really good chance with this project to really take my time to learn and develop. And if you guys got any tips or anything you've used to get a better understanding of SQL, please do let me know down in the comments below, and I'll certainly have a look into them. It'll really help me out, and it'll just mean I can help develop the project even further, and learn hopefully a little bit quicker, which is going to be key. So, why have I chosen the employee management system as well? Now, I'll be honest with you, there's not really any specific reason. It's quite generic. I like learning and doing things that involve data. I'm not really a fan of developing, for example, games in software or anything like that. I really enjoy developing logic and systems that allow the transfer of information from one person to the other, and seeing what I can do with that. Employee management to me made the most sense because you can have different aspects of that which I can develop into their own services, which I explained earlier was payroll, staff management, and like pay performance as well. So that's why I've chosen this, because it will allow me to develop that. And it's an incremental increase in difficulty, which is also good. The architecture. Already kind of spoke about this. One key thing I want to talk about here, though, which is really quite different, is the authentication. Now, the authentication has been separated into its own service, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. We've done that and split them into their own services so that each service can use API calls to communicate with each other, and it also means they each have their own single responsibility. In my last project, one thing I did learn is because everything relied on one particular user, and the service itself only relied and only needed one database, I realized that's not really accurate or very much a simulation of how it might work in the real world, where databases might be more advanced, you may have multiple users, and they're not always going to communicate just in the same service. You're going to have to get used to using API calls for services to talk to each other. And that was something that I've learned. We have done it as modular design, and that's how I've planned it. So everything can be, for example, taken out, upgraded on its own, and put back into the system. How have we done that? It's took a bit of planning. I've done a little bit of prep on how I'm going to build it, particularly focusing around what parts to build first. And I've put a lot more thought into using things like flowcharts for how each service is going to communicate with each other and how the user journey is going to look like. That's something that really struck me as important in this project. When most people, I think, go through code, and I think you do it when you first started, I certainly was, you do focus yourself so much on the logic for what you see as makes sense, you forget to really stop and take a break and just think, right, well, if I was a user of this system, what would I like to experience? And in a weird way, once you know that, it's a lot easier, I think, to plan and form an understanding of what things you're going to need in place to get it to work. I have also done the modular design so it's easily expandable. That is in line with a lot of systems nowadays. Um, Not with all, believe it or not, there's a lot of companies now that are still using very, very old systems, but they just keep trying to add features on it, which does work. But one thing that I think a lot of companies are really looking for now is for you to be able to show that you can develop code in a microservice way, not on a monolith way. If you don't know what that means, monolith is essentially where it's all one massive chunk of code. Think of like a bowl of spaghetti code. Microservices is essentially like this design, very modular. You can take a service out, you can put it back in, you can add another service on, but they don't rely on each other in order to work. And that's the difference. And that's the kind of design that we've adopted to develop in this new project. Now, with that being the case, authentication, how are we doing that? Well, that's really not changed too much. It's going to be the same thing as before with using a username and a hashed passwords. And in exchange, they'll get a token, they'll get an ID, they'll get a role, and they'll get an expiry as well. What I'm trying to aim for is for the authentication, because that's separate, I'm trying to aim for the authentication service to be the only service that can actually create tokens, and for every other service to only validate them. Now, I've not quite got to the stage where I've understood exactly how I'm going to do that yet. I do know there are ways of doing that. As to how I'm going to implement it, I'm not quite sure. But it's certainly something we're going to look into as I get further in and get my teeth a bit more in to the coding and actually starting to kick off the development. Now, why have we done that? Well, we want role-based access because of the kind of information we're going to have. Like in a real company, not all employees are going to be the same. Some employees might be managers, some might be senior managers, some might be executives, and it can go up and up and up. So how I've done this is we're going to use role-based authentication to separate it all. Now, when I showed you my previous project, it was very limited in the roles. There wasn't much expandability. You couldn't add roles on, so to speak. It was very, very limited. This is a little bit different. Because the authentication service is separate, we got tables that allow multiple roles, allow descriptions within those roles, and allow role IDs, etc. All of that's there so that if you wanted to add another role into this system, you could do so without having to change much of the code and without having to worry about breaking anything, which is really important. It also prevents access to things that I don't want an employee to have access to. So, for example, me, if I was an employee, I don't need access to other people's payroll or other people's performance data. All I need access to is my own. A manager, for example, may need access to their team's employee data or performance data. Do they need access to their payroll? Not really. And that's what we're trying to do here, trying to develop a system that will allow roles to be what the logic uses to give the correct data. And that's going to be something that's going to take a lot of experimenting on, I think. I think this is where the challenge is going to lie with authentication. And I'm really excited to see how it turns out, because I do think it's possible. I do think I can do it. But I also think it's going to cause headaches. So we'll wait and see. But that's what we plan to do with the authentication and the roles. Now, service-to-server security. So how a service is going to talk. We already spoke about this briefly. API communication, application program interface. So they're all going to communicate to each other with calls between the services, and we're going to use controllers to help guide the data to where it needs to go. Now, this is going to be important because this is going to require a lot of testing to make sure they all talk to each other correctly. But it's also important because it's going to require a lot of planning. It's also going to require a lot of learning as well, because whilst I do use API calls, I haven't used them as often, and this project is really going to be a tester to that, using different libraries that will allow me to build my own client to speak to that API point is going to be key. Token validation, really important and really vital. This is going to allow me to make sure that the tokens are valid. It's going to allow me to make sure that the tokens have the right roles. And a shared secret, that's going to be important because that will stop any unauthorized data leaks, prevents any open access or anything like that, which is what we want. And it means every request has to have a token, which will stop someone getting in when they shouldn't have access to the system. Exception handling and debugging, what we're going to do here. Now, this is where we're going to up the game a little bit. Last time in my other project, I did do a bit of custom exceptions. I did do global handlers for cleaner logs to just describe what went wrong, to handle and standardize error responses, so that if you're looking at it as a user, you can see exactly why it hasn't worked, and to also stop any problems with someone getting in when they shouldn't. It also helps with debugging locally, makes it easier for me to understand what went wrong. Also helps when it comes to production. In production, if there's issues, if you've got those custom exceptions, when you know something could show up, it stops someone going, oh, I think this is what went wrong, when actually this is what went wrong. And it means errors can't almost hide between other errors, which can just stop you and slow you down to get into the problem. It also means that it's going to be easier to maintain and to look at in case something goes wrong, which is also what we want. And this is something which I'm going to try to incorporate from the get-go, thinking about what kind of exceptions this code is going to face in the logic and how I want that handled, and try to do that more proactively as I'm developing the code, rather than develop it like I did in the previous one, get to the very end, and then I'm thinking about, oh, what could go wrong here? So that's going to be really important. For the next slide, we got database and flyway. That's important. Database flyway is going to be very important. The reason being is I've used a new technology called flyway for the database. Why have I done this? Well, it means that each service owns its own database, and I will explain how that works. And it also acts as kind of version control for your database. Now, flyway is a system that manages your kind of users and database a bit like GitHub when it comes to version control. So it allows you to just add things on that you want changed by committing those changes each time the project is run. But the benefit of Flyway is each service has its own what's called Flyway migration files. It's a fancy word for saying its own Flyway files. So that because each service has its own user, within that service, it will only need to create the tables I ask it to that is necessary. So, for example, if I want to make a change to the payroll service and the user for the payroll service, instead of me having to go to some massive monolithic code where I've got all of the kind of configuration and table set up, I just need to go directly in that service, add a new Flyway migration file, state the changes I want to take place, rerun it, boom, changes are done. And that's the beauty of it. It makes it a lot easier to make sure that each service only modifies its own tables, stops any contamination between services accidentally modifying some other person's tables, and it also means it avoids shared SQL files, which makes it a bit more scalable. Because if I wanted to add a new service after this one, I can add a new service, it could get its own user, it could have its own migration files, which would mean it would stay in its own kind of zone. I wouldn't have to go to my payroll service or my staff management service or my author and any of that. I wouldn't have to go into any of that, which is what's key. And I'm really excited to show you guys this because I think it'll be a really good one to use. Docker and configuration. This is where we're doing similar to what we did last time. Docker Compose is going to start all services, it's going to handle ports, service names, environment variables, credentials, all of that kind of stuff. Docker is going to handle, and the YAML's going to handle that as well, which is good. One command will run the entire system. I really wanted this because I really wanted it to be so that when I start up the project, instead of me having to do each individual service, it will just start everything off based on that compose file, which would be very cool. It's going to match real-world deployment methods. Most real-world deployment does this. They're not going to have it where you're going to start each service individually. You've got to think sometimes, I've only got 3 services here, but some businesses might have 20, 25, 30 services that are massive. don't want to have to be going through and starting each of those individually. Also helps when you go to look at something like Kubernetes. Now, for those of you who don't know, Kubernetes is kind of like what manages your kind of, what's the best way to say it? Your project, so to speak, in Docker. So when this is finished, if I wanted to run this on a server, I might want to have multiple instances of this running on a server. Kubernetes allows you to manage that. And it also allows you to manage all the containers. So for example, if say one of my containers was to go down, with Kubernetes, you can have it so that it will revitalize that container and bring it back up, or start a whole new version of the project. So it's just something that would help. I mean, I can look at doing it down the line. Service communication. This hasn't really changed. As I said, it's going to be that services exchange data through APIs. It's going to be the shared tokens and business data. There isn't going to be any direct database sharing, which is what's key. A user can't have access to another user's stuff. As I said before, stops accidental errors and improves security as well, which is really, really important. Yeah. Future plans. So besides doing the back end and all the kind of code stuff, I'm aiming for this system to support maybe 30 or 40 employees. I'm going to have a UI, a front end if I can. I'm going to have some form of monitoring if I can. And I'm also going to look at continuous integration and continuous development as well, where possible, when it comes to adding new features on. It does depend, because this is only a one-time project. It's not something I'm necessarily going to be deploying, but I was thinking about it and I might give it a go. Production ready when is going to be when it's stable, secure, and works, and is also scalable when it comes to the actual performance of it. I am going to make sure it's all tested as well. I'm going to keep updating my GitHub. I'm going to show you where that is at the end, so do not worry. And you'll be able to have a look and keep up with me on there. So that's it, really. That's the closing for the project. As I said, it is going to be a learning project. This is a really good opportunity for me to be able to understand exactly how I can develop my own skills, for me to understand how I can use API calls more, understand and go and look for different technologies. And that's really important, guys. You know, try new projects. Don't just try to do a new project based on what you already know. Try to do a new project that really challenges you, that you can go and search for new technological solutions for the problem you're facing. Flyway is a golden one for me. And from what I've heard when it comes to interviews, that's really useful as well. If you can go to them and say, this is the problem I found, and instead of saying, I used something I used before, if you can say, so then I had a look and I found this bit of technology that was suited to what I needed, and you've then been able to learn that technology and implement it, that's really useful of a skill. And certainly I've learned, for me, that's going to be a really nice thing to take away from this project. As I said, you got my GitHub. That's all on the channel. You got my LinkedIn as well. Okay, I'm gonna update them there, guys. When I'm gonna do new videos, I'm gonna try to be more active on LinkedIn if I can. And you're also gonna get more progress videos for the milestones. So for each iteration, the more and more I do, any new features or anything like that, I'll certainly be posting about it. I will say, because I've obviously got the uni now, I'm gonna be 100% honest. I may not be able to put the quantity of videos out there as I have. I'm planning to do uni as well as potentially some extra courses on the side, and this, and then the videos as well. So it's going to be a lot, but just be patient with us. And I really appreciate every single one of your support, and it means the world to me. So I am very, very grateful. With that being the case, that is it. There's nothing else for that one, guys. So all I would say is, if you enjoyed the video, then I really would encourage you to like, subscribe if you can. That's always quite nice. Let me know in the comments down below what you think as well. If you do anything differently, what you'd like to see, what you'd like to do, and we'll go from there. Thank you, guys.